set out some important principles in terms of fundamental rights for every individual anywhere around the world. And those principles around equality, around freedoms and justice are principles that were relevant 75 years ago and just as relevant today. So I think it's a great opportunity to be able to reflect on the successes and the progress that has been made around the world, but also to consider where we need to go further and what more we need to do to ensure that everyone around the world can enjoy the freedoms that you and I are able to enjoy on a daily basis.
So it has been like 75 years since the declaration existed. From your perspective, which aspect of human rights violations that you think is the biggest concern at the moment? Because there are many issues like freedom of expression, democracy, media freedom, and even violence against women.
I mean, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says these rights apply equally to everyone, whether they are freedom of association or expression or on women's rights. But it's true to say that, of course, there's much more work to be done, whichever country you're in, actually. I think for me personally, I'd say championing and advancing women's rights is very important to me. And I've seen through my visits to countries around the world how young girls and young women are unable to participate in society, unable to have an education, unable to make decisions about their bodies, and unable to take forward equal treatment as men. And I think as a society, we miss out as well. And for me, as a mother to 2 children, I want my children and I want other children around the world to have those same opportunities. So I think we need to make more of an active decision to advance women's rights around the world, because when you leave 50% of the population behind, then we are truly not achieving our goals.
It's really interesting that we're talking about women's rights and gender equality here, because there have been a lot of studies that said that gender equality will not be achieved until like 100 years. So why do you think gender equality is so hard to achieve even in this modern era?
Yeah, those statistics are really depressing,
yeah.
As you say, because it makes you realise that, we won't be around to see that equality to be achieved unless we take more and more conscious and active steps to drive that. And the truth is that in many cultures and many communities around the world, there are gender stereotypes that remain entrenched, and that requires a change in culture and a change in mindset, and that doesn't unfortunately happen overnight. That requires a lot of effort and a lot of education around these issues, and a lot of dialogue and conversations with all parts of the community to achieve that. And I think one aspect where I think we are making considerable progress is ensuring that young girls have access to education. The more educated girls are around the world, and they then in the future will ensure that their children have the same privileges and the same accesses, and they have that ability to demand their rights and fight for their rights. And I think this is something we can do, and certainly the UK is absolutely committed to doing in terms of our development programmes around the world, to ensure that no girl is left behind. And it's heartbreaking when you go around some of these communities where young girls feel that they have to stay at home, or they have to work, or they're unable to enjoy the same freedoms as their brother is able to do as well. So I think, are we going to see this change overnight? No, but considerable strides have been made in women's rights around the world, and it's fantastic to see. And it's fantastic to see the Thai government also promoting and championing women's rights as well. And I think it's duty of all of us, whether we have human rights ambassador in our title or activists on our title, to genuinely champion gender equality. And I think it's only when we can change mindsets, particularly of those who are the decision makers in these different communities, whether that's in a business or in a boardroom, or whether that's in the family homes as well, to achieve that.
Is there a particular region in the world that concerns you the most regarding women's rights and the access to education for girls?
I mean, there's many parts of the world and where simply driven by economic factors and some of these cultural factors that there hasn't been the possibility. Young girls are sometimes driven to early forced marriage or into employment at a young age, so that they cannot do so simply for the family to survive. So it's not specific to a particular part of the world, but there are communities in many parts of the world where the UK is ensuring it's investing to enable that. And I've seen the benefits, of this. And when I ask young people around the world, what's the one difference that will make, what's one thing that will make a difference to your life? 99% of the time, the answer is education. They see education as their lifeline, as ability to change their future, to change the future of their children, so that their daughter is not in that same cycle, so that their daughter can be educated, not in early forced marriage, is able to be economically empowered and having the ability to speak up and have the voice to stand up for her rights.
What do you think remains the barrier that prevents women from having the voice or having the opportunities, or even things like, being financially independent? What do you think is holding women back the most?
I think these differ from many communities. What I'd say, first of all, the important necessary step is to ensure that those protections are enshrined in law. So of course they are very clear, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it's important that national laws enshrine equality for women alongside men, and indeed other genders as well. So I think the law has to be there. But beyond the law, you've got to be able to change the policies and the institutions that support the law, whether that's the police or the judiciary, and you've got to educate communities and educate the families as well. And until we achieve that, it will be hard. But even in well-educated societies, we still see that gender gap. And think about, are our policies already biased towards women in terms of how employment is selected or recruitment is selected? So generally, women are not a threat, and I think and maybe sometimes that is the issue as well as the cultural aspect. And it's to say, having the diversity of voices in your organisations, in your communities, is important, because, as I said, they represent 50% of the population. And when we look at kind of women's policies, we need to have them involved in those decision-making aspects as well. So I think that is important. I think, you said examples where I probably, will be specific about one country, and that's Afghanistan. And for me, these young girls were able to enjoy rights and freedoms for a number of years, and overnight that rug was pulled from under their feet. And those basic rights in terms of being able to be educated, to move around freely, were taken away. And Afghanistan is the only country in the world that does not permit girls to go to school. That's made it illegal for girls to go to school, and that is shocking.
From my understanding, ever since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, girls are banned from going to school. Women were not even allowed to go to hairdressers, and that is really oppressing to begin with. And what I've also heard was that a lot of female journalists have to go on exile in order to report the situation in Afghanistan.
I mean, of course, the situation is extremely difficult for women living in Afghanistan and young girls living in Afghanistan. And I've met many of the incredible Afghan women who unfortunately have been forced into exile. But what gives me confidence is these women. These women are fighters, are not giving up, and want to drive change back in Afghanistan. And they're advocating, they're using their voice. They are advocating at the United Nations, they're advocating in other communities to say, we need to stand up to this. This is unacceptable. And that's what gives me confidence that there are communities, men and women, not just from the Afghan community, but also, many of us are touched by this, who are committed to standing up and speaking up about this and ensuring that we can apply pressure and accountability to ensure that this can change going forward. What I would say, and my advice is, it's always one step at a time. If If I feel that our engagement, even in a conversation with a young person, empowered that person to speak up and to give them a voice, then we've made a difference. And I think that's how we have to take it. Every positive step is in the right direction is something we should recognise. And I think it's really important to bring in male allies into this. So women's rights issue isn't a women's issue. It's a men's issue as well as a women's issue. And I think the more we have conversations with everyone around what those genuine barriers are and how we can resolve them, then I think we can move a lot quicker. So we need champions, and we need champions in all those spaces to actively do so. I think the other thing that we can all do is, if we fundamentally believe in women's rights, is amplify the voices. Amplify the voices of those who are unable to speak up or those who are oppressed. Amplify the voices of those who are fighting for these rights, the human rights defenders and the activists who are doing so under sometimes extremely difficult circumstances and personal, with their lives at risk as well, to ensure that their voices are being heard and those messages are being delivered. And I feel very lucky that I get to meet and engage with communities around the world and bring those voices back to the United Nations.
But when we talk about women's rights, many people often think of the word feminist. So some people seems to have a bit of fear of the word feminist, and they tend to have some sort of bias when a feminist comes out and talks about women's rights, and some people would think that they're alienating men or other genders or other marginalized groups. So what are your thoughts on this, and how should we really perceive the word feminism?
And again, you're right, in different communities feminism means different things. So it's obviously some are feeling threatened or feeling that this is very aggressive or oppressive language. I'm proud to say I'm a feminist. And I think, and I know many men who will say they're feminists too. So it's not a word associated just with women. And I say this because it's until we start recognizing that we need to take conscious and active steps, we will be waiting those 100 years to deliver that change. And to consciously say we're going to think about our policies to make sure they are gender focused, they're focused on women in these communities, and let's think about it. Life will carry on as normal and change will be very slow. So it does require active steps and activism, and therefore feminism to me is a very active word in that respect.
One last question. Since you've been engaging with representatives of the Thai government as well as some human rights defenders as well, so what would be your advice to Thailand in terms of improving human rights as well as women's rights?
Every country is on a journey on human rights, and I think the first priority is the government committing to human rights. And I know that the Prime Minister of Thailand at the UN General Assembly made very clear his personal commitment to human rights. And I think that political commitment is very important starting step. I think the best way to achieve progress on human rights is to engage with the diversity of voices and all stakeholders, including the communities that are most marginalised and the most vulnerable and the most discriminated, to hear about their concerns, to understand those issues. And for me, I mean, maybe I'm telling this to be something quite simplistic, but human rights to me are simple. The same rights I enjoy, you're entitled to, others who are watching are also entitled to. So it's simply about equality. There's simply ensuring that there's that treatment, and how do we tackle some of those barriers if there is that discrimination that's existing. So my advice is that don't shy away from it. Don't see this as a political issue. Human rights are essential for any state to achieve their sustainable development goals and that ambition to prosper in a sustainable way that leaves no one behind.
Definitely. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Thank you.